So really what we had hoped to do in this session is talk a little bit about powerful teaching strategies for years 4 to 10 and what we mean by those things. Give you windows into some of the things that are included in this course that we've been preparing and a little bit of information about that. It's a small 5-credit master's level course, and so it's called a micro credential because it's small. And the 5 credits can count towards a Master's of Education or another postgraduate qualification, or they can just be done as a single 5 credits. We'll talk a little bit more about the structure of the course at the end, but really we want to give you a window into what we've been working on and how we're hoping it's going to work. So in the session, we would like to give you some examples from the course to show ways of effective teaching of fractions, decimals, percentages, proportional thinking. So those we decided were the key areas that we wanted to look on in this course. There's been talk that there might be other maths teaching related courses to follow, which might look at different content areas. But those are the ones that are mostly in this. So you're all experienced teachers, and so you all have great ways of teaching these things already. So some of the things in the course and in today's session, you'll recognize and think, yeah, great, yes, I do that. But hopefully there are some other things that you might not have been using or have known about, but have slipped out of your common practice. And so the course gives you a way of just re-looking at some of the things and ways of teaching. One of the exciting things about this, and you'll see some examples today, is that these micro-credentials focus on using videos of expert teachers talking about their work. So it's not Sarah and I up front saying, here are ways of teaching. We've written the background material, but there are lots of video clips of teachers talking about the misconceptions that they've seen that students have with working with fractions or decimals, percentages, and ways that they use to help students overcome those misconceptions, or the ways that they use equipment and demonstrating how they might use diagrams to show how to work with decimals. So we've been very, very lucky to have 6 expert teachers, three from Wellington and 3 from outside of Wellington, 3 who have worked in primary schools and 3 who are worked in secondary schools, and some who've worked in both. So we're really very grateful to them, and you'll see some snippets of their examples. Also, there are interactive tasks, reflection tasks, exploring tasks, and we've tried, as Jared mentioned, and knows it's dear to my heart, we've tried to have a bicultural flavour through what we do in this course. There might be some singing in today's session, so just warning you, if you've been to my sessions before, you know we usually sing. So there might not be, but there might be. So just be ready just in case. And I'm sure I've forgotten to say some things, but we've got various ways of catching up. I'm going to share screen. And it'll be this one. So hopefully now you can see the lead PowerPoint. So the course is called Supporting Student Success in Mathematics Learning. And thank you very much, AMA Online, for having us today. All of the parts of the course start with a whakatauki. And so our overall one for the course is Mā te huruhuru te manu karere, by feathers of bird flies. We've chosen fractions, percentage, decimals for this course because they're so important, not just for the maths, that part, the number part of the maths curriculum, but for many parts of the mathematics and statistics curriculum, and for everyday life, and for students learning outside. So we see students' capabilities with these parts of the maths curriculum as being the feathers that help the bird fly that through all of these other aspects of mathematics. So that's what our aim is, that to equip the students with fractions, percentage, decimals capabilities that enable them to pick up and use those things wherever they need them. We're going to explore evidence-based ways of helping students understand, use, and enjoy mathematical ideas. Our focus is on ākonga working with confidence and pleasure with proportions, fractions, decimals, and percentages. We all know that many students and many of us have some anxious feelings when it comes to maths and to particular parts of maths. And from my experience in the classroom, often these things came to the fore with fractions and decimals and percentages. And so part of our course is focused on acknowledging that there is such a thing as maths anxiety and thinking about what are some ways that we can help students and others develop confidence and pleasure with working. So not just having the skills, but having the disposition where they're wanting to use these things and can use these things with some enjoyment rather than with trepidation. So our objectives for today will that hopefully by the end of the session, you'll be able to explain why proportions are important for ākonga to be able to use with confidence, able to describe strategies that support development of conceptual understanding, using equipment, using representations or diagrams, using contexts and awareness of misconceptions, and we'll be able to explain strategies for developing retention of and fluency. So really, we see two things as being very important in this area: conceptual understanding. So students really understanding what's happening with how the fractions work and how operations with fractions and decimals and percentages work, really understanding rather than a rule-based approach of I do this, I do this, I do this, and I get the answer without that understanding. And the other thing is, once they've got the understanding, is how can we help them to be fluent with those ideas and be able to retain them and use them straight away? So our expert teachers talk about both those things, that development of conceptual understanding and the development of fluency. There's something else I was going to mention, but I can't remember what it was, so we will move on. So first of all, this is an interactive session, by the way, in case I didn't say. What we'd really like if you could, we're going to have a breakout room soon to discuss some things, and we're going to have some answers in the chat, please, for some things. And so before we listen to Lee, could you put some answers to question 1 and question 2 in the chat? And that's why it's 1 and 2. So you can put in a 1 and then type in your answer, and a 2 and type in your answer. We know which answers are from which. So why do you think proportions are important for ākonga to be able to use with confidence? And 2, how can we help ākonga be confident and positive about their maths and stats learning? So that's in general. So your favourite strategies for helping students see why these things are important for them to learn, and your favourite strategies for helping students to be confident and positive about maths and stats learning. So I'll just give a few minutes for you to put ideas in the chat and to be reading and responding to one another. Or is it not? Perhaps you don't think that it's important, and you don't think that it's important that, so please feel free to argue back and say, no, not important, but this is just the skills is what I am for. Great to see the chat answers coming in. Thank you so much. Feel free to keep adding to the chat. I'm going to show you a first snippet of one of our videos. This is from Lee Mann, who's the head of maths at Scots College in Wellington. We chose Lee because she had done some thesis work on maths anxiety. And so we asked her to talk a little bit about how she ensures that her students feel comfortable about doing maths. And so we're just going to share a little bit from hers. But so fingers crossed. Here we go. We did practice this and it worked.
A number of years ago, I did my postgrad research into maths anxiety. There's lots of research around the world into this, and it really says that middle school, year 9, is when maths anxiety peaks. And we find that about 20% of students are scoring high on a maths anxiety.
Can you just pause there a minute?
1 in 5 students.
Yes.
Yeah, you're on your PowerPoint screen rather than the video screen.
Okay, so, okay, stop here. Thank you, Sarah.
The sound was coming through fine, but.
Oh, okay, good. So hopefully this one, does that look right now?
Yep, perfect.
Good, we'll continue. Thank you so much.
1 in 5 teachers, 1 in 5 principals, 1 in 5 people in the world have quite bad maths anxiety. So I really thought it was important to study that, and I came up with some findings from my study. And so now when I teach my middle schoolers, I have 2 goals. Number 1, to have fun, and number 2, to teach them maths in that order, quite deliberately. Because what I found is that you might have 5 kids in your class that are actually silently suffering with quite bad maths anxiety. And that might just take the form of being scared to walk in the door of the maths classroom, being scared to say, I've got maths next, oh no. And it may even go into the home and affect sleep and all sorts of things. My number 1 goal is just to make sure that kids can feel okay about coming in the door and sitting down in the maths classroom. If nothing else, that they feel okay about having a safe space, that it's a friendly environment, that it's not a threatening environment or something to fear. And so how do we create that? Well, we have fun. And it doesn't mean that we have to have songs and dance and games and fun all of the time. But if you walk into my classroom, and hopefully if you ask my students what's maths like, they will say, yeah, I like maths, it's fun. I don't use a textbook. I occasionally use a worksheet, but I really try and find fun ways of doing the same thing to do the same learning. There's lots of online games. There's collaborative games you can play with the students. There's hands-on things you can be doing. So that's my number 1 goal, is to have them feeling happy, because if you don't have that, then you can't get any maths into them.
Right, now I'll see if I can get back to the PowerPoint. What can you see now? I'm going to...
Still your browser.
Okay, stop share and... PowerPoint?
Yep, good.
Good, from current slide. Good. So Lee goes into, in other snippets of video, she goes into some specific strategies that she uses, at where she finds games, what games she uses, how she uses them, and so on. But you can see her philosophy and her attending to the fact that some of her students need to feel comfortable before they can even take any maths in. So I want to go to our next activity for you. I think students are happier learning things when they know why they're learning them. And when we think about proportions, we can write proportions as fractions, we can write them as decimals, we can write them as percentages. So the students might say, well, why do we need all of these different things? Why can't we just stick with fractions and that's fine, thank you very much? Or actually, I like decimals better, so why can't I just use decimals all of the time? So we're going to have a little breakout room activity, and this is for you to talk. I think we'll use groups of 4, just very briefly, 3 or 4 minutes, for why do we need all 3? Why do we, and how can we explain to students that all of these different kinds of proportions are all necessary for us? So you might be able to think about why are fractions are most often used for these kinds of things, or decimals are most often used for those kinds of things, or percentages for, how would you persuade students? So your breakout room task is to discuss how would you help students realize that we need these 3 different ways of describing proportions, and when is each proportion most often used? You got confidence, you know what we are expecting of you now? Excellent. I'll take that as got everybody back. Got everybody back. Thank you so much. I hope you had some wonderful discussions. And so you've all discussed this, so we're not going to go over that because we've got other things to do. But I imagine that some of these things were the things that you talked about, is that some of these things we're more likely to use either fractions or decimals or percentages. And that so the 3 things are all necessary for our different contexts where those things are most useful. But it also helps us realize why converting between fractions and decimals and percentages is an important skill and necessary to be able for students to be able to do, because yeah, so anyway, I think that if students understand why something is useful for them to learn, they're more likely to be engaged. Okay. So in terms of powerful strategies, we wanted to focus on what teaching strategies are powerful supporting our learning of fractions, decimals, and percentages. First of all, we thought understanding terms is so very important. For those of you in Vince's session this morning, he talked about a couple of things. He talked about the importance of generalization. And I was thinking in mathematics learning, and he was talking in terms of geometry, but I thought the understanding terms, that's that we start with that generalizing in maths often, of saying these are the ways that we call these things, regardless of the size of the fraction, regardless of the size of the decimal. There's a decimal point, there's a denominator, there's a percentage sign. So understanding the terms is really important, and that's a focus that we have in the course. The powerful strategies for teaching and learning. As we know, using equipment, really important for that hands-on, for some of our students to really get a good understanding. Using diagrams and representations. And also Vince talked about the importance of visual images that for learning, and that it's the most important way that we learn is through visual images. And I thought, well, actually the equipment links to that, and representations and diagrams linked to that. So it helps us understand why those strategies work so well in maths for learning. Real life contexts are very important for students to understand ideas. And again, that visualization of those real objects can help embed that understanding. And the last aspect that we focus on is awareness of misconceptions. So those things are all helpful. So I want to go through each of those things in turn to give some examples. So understanding terms for fractions, the denominator, the number at the bottom, or tau raro. And so those of you who know ki runga ki raro, up and down, those are the words, and tau for number. So the Te Reo Māori terms make sense, and they can help us emphasize things about the mathematical terms. And so a denominator, it's the number at the bottom. It helps tell us how many pieces there are out of whatever the whole is, and therefore how big those pieces are in relation to the whole. And it's the number at the bottom, tau raro. The numerator, the number at the top, is numa, it's the number, how many bits we have, and it's the tau ronga, it's the number at the top of the fraction. So each of the parts of the course, we focus in on key terms first and ways of helping students understand and remember those terms. I think we get so used to using these terms when we're teaching and in our own experience that we can assume that there's knowledge and understanding of the terms that we use, but having a focus on those is important. So the visual image at the bottom helps show what 7/3 is. The 3, the denominator, how big the bits are, a third, a third, a third, they're thirds of a whole. And the 7, how many pieces there are. So you can see the pink shading. The diagram makes it clear that that's the same as 2 whole things and 1 more third, 7/3. So the diagram really helps us understand the fraction, the representations.
Just a comment there.
Yes.
Quite interested in the way that you put on the top half of your slide. I think whenever I do it, I do it in the same fraction and point them out. And the focus goes to numerator before it goes to denominator. And the way you've done it, the focus is on how many pieces there are before we start thinking about, how many splits there are before how many pieces you've got.
Well, that's interesting because, yes, and I'm sure there's probably no one right way, and different things will work well for different students depending on their starting points. So yeah,
I like it. I hadn't thought
thank
of
you for
it.
that comment, Jared. That's cool. The other way is to think about what is the whole, and in this part of the course, we try to really emphasize this, thinking about what is the one, what's the whole, what's the whole, is it a measurement? Is it a set? Is it a collection? Is it a number? So because the fraction only makes sense if we've got a sense of what is the whole thing. And so, for example, if our whole thing is 100 people and we divide into 2 groups or halves, then there's 50 people in each group, and a half is quite a lot. It's 50 whole people. But if our 1 is a centimeter, a half is just a half a centimeter. It's quite a tiny thing. So the half is in relation, the fraction is in relation to what is the whole thing. And I think sometimes we make an assumption that students have got the whole in their head. Sorry, I didn't really quite mean it to sound quite like that. So I want to show an example of Shelley. Shelley Vale is experienced primary teacher. She's worked in the ministry. She's worked in teacher professional development, and she's now working teaching in a secondary school in Wellington. And she's going to show an example of ways of supporting students' understanding of fractions and linking their use of equipment or hands-on with using number lines. So I'm going to do a new share. And it is this one. And so watch how Shelley helps students with using equipment and then linking to the diagram.
Our whole as a bar into whatever fraction it is. In this case, it's thirds. So here's my whole bag, and I divide that into my thirds. So here's my 1/3. There's my red Easter eggs. 2/3. I've got my red and blue. 3/3. I've got all 3 colours. Then I would introduce my number line. Now I've got an extra couple of bags here because when we're using number lines to help address the misconception that fractions all fit between 0 and 1, it's really important that we're using fractions beyond 1. So in this case, I've got 3 bags, so I'll go up to 3. There's 1 bag, there's 2 bags, 3 bags. Cool. And then we can start thinking about where different amounts of fractions fit on the number line. So I might ask students to talk about and find where, say, 1 bag with just the red Easter eggs would fit on the number line and how we'd name that. So it's going to be bigger than 1. So 1 and 1/3. So that would fit about there.
Can you see the PowerPoint? No, oh, hang on, I need to change.
Yes, but you just need to
I think I'm doing
present
a
it.
bit of it. Oops. Apologies. Okay, so that was an example showing using equipment and linking to diagrams. And in our next example, I want to show Paul Jack. Paul is an experienced primary school teacher in Christchurch. He's now working at Middleton Grange. And I also want to say that we have also got some videos from the program called Spring into Maths. And we can say more about Spring into Maths later, but it's got some really good examples of how to use equipment and representations for helping students who are struggling with mathematical ideas. And so we might not do singing actually, but we could do some springing from Spring into Maths in the session. So this time, this is an example, the last example video, and it's Paul talking about using representations.
One of the things I've been trying to challenge myself in my own pedagogy and mathematical practice is really going at the year 5-6 space, where I've been primarily the last few years, is using supports and using tactile things that the kids can learn. Because sometimes you get out of the juniors, go, oh, that's a bit young now, and I guess I stopped using a lot of it. But certainly when I found, particularly coming to fractions and decimals and percentages, having something visual or having something hands-on has really been a really great support for them. And so that's been my challenge in my own math teaching and learning. How can I provide those things to help get over a hurdle or a barrier within this kind of space of mathematics?
So you see there are our themes keep coming through in the videos of acknowledging that students may have some panic and some struggles and ways around that. And the theme of using equipment can help, using representations or diagrams can help, using real life context can help, and awareness of misconceptions. So those are our messages for this session, as well as, and so our real life contexts. Division of fractions is the one I've chosen for this, because if we just look at 5 divided by a quarter, if we put our minds in our students' heads, or the way that they would think, is what on earth does that mean, to divide a number by a fraction, or 4 meters divided by 2/3 of a meter? Why would I ever need to do that? Or what does that actually mean? And sometimes the real life context can really help with making these straightforward rather than problematic or confusing. So what kinds of, if you could put into the chat some context for dividing by a fraction. When might we ever want to divide by a fraction, or what could be a context for 5 divided by a quarter that would make that make sense to somebody, or 4 meters divided by 2/3 of a meter? So we got some nice ideas coming in the chat. I hope so. Real life reasons why you might divide by, because this is one of the things we expect students to learn how to do. If we'd all gone out and watched sport this morning, or helped a team with sport, we might have thought that we need to take some oranges for them at halftime. So how many quarters do I get if I have 5 oranges? How can I divide 5 oranges into quarters? How many would I have? I would have 20. So there's a context. The material example is, if I'm making something that takes 2/3 of a meter, little bags, for example, how many of those can I make if I have 4 meters worth of material? So the context then make it much more straightforward, because it's something that students probably already are involved in doing, but they don't necessarily recognize it as the equation that we've written in the classroom. So I'm sure you, and thank you for the ideas in the chat as well. Another aspect of the course, it's, as you can see, it's heavily practice orientated. It's heavily examples about teaching and ways to use in teaching. In each of the modules, we also do have some reading. Some of them are tied specifically to content areas, and some of them are more generic. So one example that I wanted to share was one of the readings that helps us understand the competency of ako, to kaiako, cultural competency of ako in maths learning. And some of the takeaways from that is having awareness of possible misconceptions and common errors, finding out about students' prior knowledge and gaps and ways of learning that work well for them, developing their conceptual understanding fits with this idea of ako, developing their fluency and retention helps with ako. Students supporting each other's learning helps with having ako in your classroom. Using context relevant to akonga, participating with akonga, involving whānau. And so those ideas link really nicely to one of the readings that we've got, which is by Karen Saunders from her PhD work. And so I'll show that on the next slide, but I just wanted to talk about these examples on the right. Games is one of the features, one of the ways of students practicing ideas and developing fluency while having fun. And so Cows and Bulls, I'm sure you might know about that game. Factor bugs to record all the factors of a particular number. So this is one of Shelley's examples where 36 is the number and what are all the factors? Well, I can do 1 times 36. I can do 2 times 18. I can do 3 times 12, 4 times 9, or 6 times 6. And having students doing lots of factor bugs for practicing these ideas to develop the fluency so that they've got these things right at their fingertips. These ako ideas come from this article by Karen. I can't wait to get to maths. Ako, which is a quote from one of her students from year 10, ako in mathematics teaching and learning. You can see that one's been a loved article for a few years, but hot off the press, she's just had published another article from her thesis supporting Māori learners through bicultural teacher-parent partnerships using the Pāti model, which is a model that she's come out of her thesis. So I highly recommend. That's a very cool article as well. So we do have emphasis on reading. It's not highly theoretical, it's highly practically based. So we've come to the end of what we wanted to share about the content. Hopefully now and before, I'm sure, you can explain why proportions are important for akonga to be able to use with confidence. Strategies that we've talked about supporting their development of conceptual understanding are using equipment, using diagrams, using contexts, and being aware of misconceptions. And for retaining ideas and developing fluency, there's that understanding that's important, and the practice and the enjoyment of the learning and knowing why it's useful. For those who want to know a little bit more about the micro-credential, it's 50 hours learning. It's over 8 weeks, spread over 8 weeks. It's online, and there are 5 modules. The next slide will show what those are. It's all interactive, and there are 3 webinars which are also interactive. The assignments are very short, and they're all related to the content and to teaching practice. For those of you who are primary or intermediate teachers or know of people who might be interested, the tertiary fees funding, there's a subsidy available through the Ministry of Education for the fees for the course. And Elizabeth is our contact person for that. The focus areas of the course, I think I've told you many times, developing positive mathematical identities of learners and teachers, supporting students with diverse maths learning needs to recognise and move away from misunderstandings and misconceptions to ensure effective math strategies and understandings, particularly with fractions, decimals, percentages, and proportional thinking. These are the modules, and the singing, the springing that we're doing is to let you know about this other material that is available, which again, Elizabeth is the contact person for. For those of you who know Julie Roberts, Julie's heavily involved in the Spring into Maths and the demonstrations of these strategies. And we pull from this in the micro-credential. So that's it, and wondered if you had any questions. But thank you so much for the opportunity, AMA Online, and for all of the work that you do in this space. And also want to acknowledge, in the space of having people from all over the country share and inviting us to present, also want to acknowledge the amazing team that Elizabeth has at the university, of the people who do the videoing and the people who make the presentations look great, and the people who do the course design. So and Sarah's great work in writing this course. So I'm very happy if there are any questions. Thank you so much.